Act 2. The Book of Horrible Damage. How to use. The titles are no longer relevant. To make it through Book 1 is to realize the focus is not on the perspective or the order, and it is much better served by you. Author's note. If the last book was unreadable, and you read that last sentence, do not presume that reading those words alone is sufficient to understand the nature of what's about to go on, which ironically means if you are the person who would likely be offended by this sort of message, to the point they felt a disclaimer was warranted. Chances are they are the ones with a failing when it comes to understanding messages without getting overly but hurt as their pre-programmed default response. Author's advice. If you think you understand enough so far, keep reading. Begin. Learn how it is the same to fail as a king as it is a lover. Measure this from the perspective of your failures to move on from T. Not as desperate as you remember if you're willing to accept that you are too stupid to see that you are more than you think you are. Anywhere you admit lack of trust in a person, you will only be taken as seriously as you take them, and such a thing is always easy to see regardless of who does it. You must understand that if you do not forgive your feelings for making you feel pain, you will never get honest feedback at all. You must instantly forgive the time you waste, or forever add to the problem until everything stalls. You must forgive your own irrationality. You must forgive everything about yourself. Ultimately, at the root somewhere, it's the only reason you feel like there are things wrong with you at all. Learn how being bad at being a tyrant limits how effectively any kingdom you serve is run. The same is true in reverse. You must forgive sensibilities. You must forgive sense. And you must forgive energy. All share the blame and all have separate guilt. Do them all at once in the same place to save time from having to go back. You must recognize where you have failed in things so poorly that people who are genuine experts in the sphere of your incompetence will not be able to handle you properly, if at all. Learn to forgive their ignorance, as well as your own, but not before you create an intimate understanding of precisely what was lost. Recognize that no matter how much you have to teach, you will only be able to teach at a rate that does not exceed your own ability to learn just as much as you share, and possibly more. Learn to recognize that stubbornness is not a virtue when there's damage being done. The answer is always try different and guess better until there is no reason for people to think better is not needed anymore. With time, better eventually becomes more than enough. Learn to remove the false sense of glory generated specifically from how limited your own sense of personal glory is. Learn how to recognize how your love reflects what you think is so far removed from you that any further idealization of it becomes the most interesting and beautiful thing in the world. Learn to recognize when love is genuine and when it is used to cheat the absorption of the one who is attached to them. Love that requires the same hate is the worst kind of selfish, self-destructive, and self-servingly motivated love that was ever invented by anyone trying to get out of anything anywhere. Love built on hate can't even love itself enough to die alone. You must remember the times you were right, and it turned out bad, if you are to remember the times you were wrong where it turned out good. You must fully devour this concept. There is no detail too small, so long as it is clearly remembered. Learn the many ways that you consider virtue in others. You make them objects in fantasies about right and wrong, no matter how well-intentioned those fantasies may be. Learn that with virtue comes responsibility, and see how you punish those who fail. Become more aware of how often you want things your way, / how often you will do things any way that is different than your own way. When the ratio of how often you want things your way, / how often you will do things any way that is different than your own way, is near enough to 1, things are stable. To know what close enough is, look around and ask if things are stable. When how often you want things your way, / how often you will do things any way that is different than your own way, is close to 0, realize how little you act without others needing to be part of it for you. When the ratio of how often you want things your way, / how often you will do things any way that is different than your own way, approaches infinity. Realize that others no longer matter to you except as objects to further the story of your own glorious conquest of not having to. Confront your own feelings. The only concept which transcends all feelings is God. Realize how little others matter to you when you do not feel they are playing their part for you well enough to keep the charade going on. In this case, the new God quickly forgets that others are mortal and unwittingly cast without cause or direction on the scope and importance of their roles. To criticize a lack of omniscience is to assume it is accessible at all. And if it is, an omniscient being would be able to tell the difference between lack of knowledge and lack of intent and get it sorted right there at the start. Realize their mistakes are plot holes in your fantasy about them. Realize they prove themselves equal to you, and you become impotent by making yourself reliant on them to perform correctly for you to be able to function at all. A lot of people will not believe you are honest when you tell them it is possible to understand the world the way you have always done before. Learn to see you are no better and multiply this understanding by every person that you've done it to before. Learn to see this so you can act and forgive it. When the desire to have someone else be the better person has you at a loss every time, it is not possible for you and a copy of yourself to recognize the levels of childishness present when it comes to not listening long enough to someone else with the goal of understanding what another person is really talking about. When the desire to have another lead is desired, but the ego demands the one being led is most qualified to be in charge, it is impossible for that person and a copy of that person to produce anything of additional value at all. When the desire to do better from a position of love is found, it goes wherever the damn well it pleases and dares you to be the one to tell them to fuck off. Being excited because you want is better than being frustrated by what you don't. Learn to think in terms of excitement. Everything is exciting. Any amount of something is always a bigger measure than none. You have to learn how to get faster if you are going to also learn how to slow down. Be smart with how you handle being the one to tell other people how they are wrong. Within the difference of what it means to be relaxed and tense, realize how different the feelings are, and how quickly one can transform from tense to relaxed. When one understands this, they realize that it is not necessary to be tense all the time, because one can go from calm to intense without any time-consuming steps. Then recognize what it means to slow the transition and explore every stop along the peak and valley of going from tense to relaxed all at once. What does it feel like when you feel it slower? Realize how little wisdom you get from your own feelings because you have decided on your own to ignore how they transform into each other on your own. If you think yourself God, then how do you blame the world you created without blaming yourself? What equals title plus question plus command plus consent integration equals addressing the conscious, unconscious, and gut-brain perspectives simultaneously. Break.